Is it inappropriate of me to start this video off by saying I'm so ducking excited? Yeah, it probably is. Okay, I won't say that. Instead, I'll start this video by showing you that I really love painting birds. Actually, I just love birds in general, and that's why I enjoy painting them. Discovering your artistic voice is about figuring out what you enjoy creating, what your subjects are, what your mediums are, and even preferences about the tools you use. Now, if you don't like birds, bear with me through this tutorial. I'm not trying to convert you into becoming a bird person, but I am going to show you how to create an acrylic painting in this style. I promise, after you've given this duck a try, you don't have to paint any more ducks or birds for the rest of the year. I promise. But maybe you'll want to. The first thing I want to do is to plot out the basic shapes of this duck. I see three main shapes in this duck. The first one is this egg-like shape of his head. I find it helpful to go over the shape a few times. This will help build the muscle memory when you transfer the image onto your paper. Next is getting the swoopy shape of his neck. And then we're on to the bill, which is like a U that's being smushed and warped a little bit. That's it. 3 simple shapes is what makes up the majority of this image. Here's a trick to help you get everything lined up correctly on your page. Take your reference image and fold it in half lengthwise and then again widthwise. This gives you a 4-quadrant grid and you can focus on one at a time. I'm going to make a little X right in the middle of my page. And because we're transferring the image to the same size paper, I can find the middle, roughly, I'm eyeballing it, and now I have my center point. I'm going to focus on just the top half of the duck. The duck's head is just a little bit lower than being in the middle of this section. Put a small mark at the top of his head and another one at the bottom. Now we have some guidelines to work with. I'm going to practice that egg shape again and notice that I'm using my whole arm to draw, not just my wrist. I feel confident about the shape and I've got my guidelines, so I'm now drawing onto the paper. I'm not worried about details at this point, but I do want to plot out my eye. Anytime you're doing a portrait, the eyes are the most important part of the entire composition. Getting the eye placement correct is going to be essential to making this duck look like a duck. As you can see, the eye is about 1/4 of the way down from the top of his head and slightly to the right of our middle fold. We're onto his neck. The back line attaches to his head and swoops down and right off the page. You'll notice his throat starts horizontally, almost parallel to the egg shape, and it's to the right of the fold. It then curves to a vertical line as it passes slightly over the fold and then back to the right of the fold. Our last shape is this squishy, warped U to make his bill. I'm noticing that the corner of his eye seems to match up with the top of his bill. So I'm going to make a little mark on my paper to understand that. And I'm sort of sketching out the shape here. You can see I keep going back and forth between the reference image and my page. Nothing's set in stone, and if you're unhappy with a mark that you've made, you can simply erase it. I'm using a watercolor pencil crayon. I really like using these as they sort of melt away as you apply the acrylic paint. I do still try to keep it fairly light so that you don't see the pencil line underneath. Alternatively, you can plot it out with a regular pencil chalk pastel, even paint itself. Step 1 is now complete. Now, this is not a drawing project. The important thing is getting the basic outline down so you can begin painting. If at this stage you feel more comfortable tracing the image, then trace away. But I want to encourage you to try and draw the image yourself. The more you practice this skill, the easier it will become. This painting relies heavily on color mixing. Mixing your own colors makes your paintings more dynamic, and with a limited color palette, we will ensure cohesion and a unified painting. I'll be using my primary colors and white. Actually, I'm using Queen Magenta instead of red because I prefer the color blend that it makes. It ensures a slightly cooler composition in the end, which I tend to like. I will be using a bit of carbon black and a tiny drop of Parole red because I want the beak color to be really, really realistic. For the background, we will be treating this more like watercolor paint. Start by diluting your paints and then apply a thin layer of water all over your paper, but avoid getting it over the top of your duck. Drop the diluted paint into the background and try not to overwork it. Do your best to avoid a big muddy mess. You could also stick to just 2 colors plus white to guarantee a non-muddy background. Blue plus yellow and white will give you a gorgeous greenish feel, which could look really lovely with this duck. I'm only going to add in a very little bit of yellow. I'm dropping white in anywhere that I think the color transition is a bit too harsh. I'm also adding in a little bit of water because I do want this to be quite light. It's really important that you don't move on to the next step until this background is completely dry. This duck has a subtle amount of value, but I'm going to use the principle of emphasis to enhance that value. I'm starting to map out a general plan for where the value is on the photograph and where I want it to be on my final piece. This step will help me to ensure that my duck still looks white overall, even though he is quite colorful. Now let's get started on the fun part and start actually painting the duck. Start off by taking some of your white and cleaning up the edges of your duck. Then you're going to want to go in and fill the entire silhouette with white paint. This will help to get rid of some of our guidelines, and also you just don't want to leave canvas showing through your acrylic paintings. It won't look right in the end. You're going to pick up some blue and or magenta paint, mix it around on the palette or not. Remember, when it comes to color mixing, you can mix directly on the canvas to get a dynamic color blend or right on the palette. To get a more consistent color, that will also be a bit flatter. Play around with both of these techniques on this project. To apply the paint, I'm just touching the brush to the canvas, touch and then lightly downwards flick it away. For this purposefully messy look, we want to just play around and be really free with our placement. The key here is to not overpaint. We're not drawing, we're mark making with this paint. So you don't want to go in and fill it in with color like you would a marker. We actually want the brush strokes to show. Right now I'm staying away from the yellow. I'm adding in my white every so often just to break up the intensity of the dark, dark area. I know I want the back of my duck to maintain that bright white, so I need to be thinking about transitioning from that dark value into the lightest value. And soon I will bring in some yellow just to add some interest and break up this very purple color I have going on right now. Make sure your brush strokes go in the direction that the feathers would be laying. So follow those curves. Since yellow is a lot easier to cover up than blue or magenta, I'm using this muddy yellow color to help me plot out where I want my middle tones to start. Remember, acrylic paint is so forgiving. If your duck ends up turning into a brown mallard duck, that's okay. Either roll with it and turn it into a brown mallard duck, or let the paint dry and go back in. Layer on some new colors on top. You can always fix mistakes when it comes to acrylic paint. I'm using softer, more muted colors in the middle section where I want those middle values to be, but I am going right to the edge, and that's because I do want some of these colors sort of peeking through the white. Eventually, I will be going back over the back of the head and neck and back of this duck with white in order to bring out those really, really bright value tones. And at the end of the day, if your duck doesn't have the right value, he's still gonna look super cool. So play and have fun and do the best you can. That's what this is all about. This part is pretty much a repeat of our last step, but now I'm going in and really committing to these marks. These are going to be the marks that are staying on top of the whole piece, the ones you see first, the ones that really stand out and tell us the whole idea of what this duck is. We're building up layers here, so there will be little peaks of other colors coming through. And this is where we're really figuring out where our darkest points, mid-tones, and lightest points are. It's not a big deal if you cover up the eye, but try to keep a little indication of where the eye is, just so that it's easier when you go to actually paint in the eye. I'm going in now with a pinkish color. It's not quite white yet, but I'm trying to establish where my white is going to be in the end and create that gradient. Now that I'm happy with the dark side, I'm going to start on the lighter side of the dark and the duck and try to bring these two tones together. I'm going to end up painting over a lot of what I've already done, and that's okay. Just keep working with it until you get to a place where you are happy. Two important concepts that you need to embrace if you are going to be an acrylic artist. Number one, trust the process. Keep going, commit to it, go all the way through it. Number two, it's gotta get to a really ugly point before it becomes absolute magic. And I promise you, the magic is about to happen. Now we're gonna work on the realistic features, the bill and then the eye. You can see I'm turning my brush in order to get into those small spaces. I like to use a flat brush, and you really can paint the entire thing with a flat brush as long as you're turning it and twisting it in order to fit it into all the tiny nooks and crannies. We're just going in with the yellow that we already have. But to make the duck more realistic, I am going to add the tiniest drop of Perol Red and give this bill some dimension. You don't want to fill the entire beak in with this orange color, but instead give some gradient color, add some different values in using the red and orange and yellow spectrum that you now have. In the original picture, I see that the duck's beak is darker, closer to the face, and then lighter toward the end of the bill. Bill, I honestly don't know. But I'm trying to keep the darker tones closer to the face and the lighter yellow further to the end of the bill. I'm going to slow this part down because the eyes are really important. We're going to start off by creating a very dark neutral that's going to appear black, but it's not black. So you're going to mix blue, magenta, and yellow all together until you get this nice, deep, dark gray. Test it out on a separate piece of paper to make sure you're at the right point of that dark, almost black color. We're going to go in and create an almond shape outline for our eye. Then go ahead and fill the entire thing in with that dark neutral color. While we're at it, we can also add in our nostril, which is just a small black teardrop. Now here's the part that I think is the most fun. This is a style I love doing, so I enjoy adding in this sort of illustration, comic-y, outline type addition. So I'm going to go in with that neutral color that I created before for the eye and add in some outline. I'm not going to outline the duck entirely, just little places where I think it needs a little bit of emphasis. This is helping to contrast our duck away from that background. Because he is so similar to the background, we need to make sure there is a separation I'm also going to go in with white. Well, black or a dark neutral is an outline. I always think of white as either a highlight or an illumination of some sort. If your highlights ever get a little aggressive, just use your finger to blend them in, as I just did right there. They're pretty forgiving. If this duck was super realistic, white with a little bit of gray shading, and then, in a pond that had greens and blues in the background, we wouldn't need to do this step. But our duck wouldn't look as fun and cool either. 10 years from now, you won't remember my name and you won't remember any projects we did, but you will remember two things about your art teacher. Number one, I loved highlights. Number two, it's all about the eyes. The eyes are the most important. So we are not yet done with these eyes. So now for the very first time, we are going to use some carbon black. I don't use a lot of black, if any, in my paintings, and honestly, you hardly ever need to use it. But in this case, we are going to make a totally solid black iris. Wait until that is completely dry, and then here's where my two ultimate art passions combine. You're going to take a tiny drop of white and give that eye a little highlight. Very subtle, very dainty. You do not need to go overboard with these highlights. Less is more. While I'm at it, I'm also going to just put a little highlight in right here, and that nostril needs a little bit of dimension as well, so it will get a tiny little highlight. And there we go, we're done. The duck is complete. Although complete is never really a thing in the art world, stop when you're at a point that you're very happy. If you'd like to add in some splatter paint, you're absolutely welcome to do that. Just do me a favor and do that outside. You do not want to splatter over your friend or classmate's duck that they're super proud of. Believe me, you will feel worse than they do, and they will feel awful. Now, the absolute last thing I will say before I end this very long video is that you can take these concepts and do them for any sort of portrait. Animal, human, doesn't matter. Take the things you've learned and create your own art. Or alternatively, redo this duck, but do it in a totally different way. Do it in 15 different ways. Do it in 100 different ways. If you find something that you enjoy, just keep trying it in a million different ways. And most importantly, paint and have fun.